Good evening and welcome to eBible Fellowship's Bible study in the book of Genesis. Tonight is study number 1 of Genesis chapter 20. And let's begin reading from the first verse. And Abraham journeyed from thence toward the south country, and dwelled between Kadesh and Shur, and sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said of Sarah his wife, She is my sister. And Abimelech king of Gerar sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night, and said to him, Behold, thou art but a dead man, for the woman which thou hast taken, for she is a man's wife. But Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, Lord, wilt thou slay also a righteous nation? Said he not unto me, She is my sister? And she, even she herself, said, He is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and innocency of my hands have I done this. And God said unto him in a dream, Yea, I know that thou didst this in the integrity of thy heart, for I also withheld thee from sinning against me. Therefore suffered I thee not to touch her. Now therefore restore the man his wife, for he is a prophet. And he shall pray for thee, and thou shalt live. And if thou restore her not, know thou that thou shalt surely die, thou and all that are thine. Well, stop reading there. Now, we begin, or the Lord begins this chapter. We begin looking into it in verse 1, where we're told that Abraham journeyed from thence toward the south country. Now, Abraham journeyed from the location he was at, where he had set up his tent. In chapter 18, it said in verse 1, And Jehovah appeared unto him in the plains of Mamre, and he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day. And there God appeared unto him and told him concerning his intention of destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. And it was there that Abraham interceded on behalf of Lot, the righteous, in the city Sodom. And remember, we read in chapter 19, in verse 27, and Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before Jehovah, and he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the plain, and beheld, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. It's after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah that Abraham once again begins to journey. Now, God doesn't give us all the details concerning the reasons why he journeyed, the situation after Sodom's destruction. Did Abraham seek out Lot? Or I'm sure he would have. Remember, he had quite a number of men working for him, his servants, and he could have sent servants to search the land once the fire had gone out, and once the heavy smoke had dissipated somewhat. Then I'm sure Abraham, out of love, concern, and even curiosity concerning his nephew Lot and Lot's family, and what had happened to them. After all, remember, he had diligently interceded on Lot's behalf for the sake of the righteous. Would God destroy the city if there were so many righteous within it? And the Lord said, far be it from him to do so. And so certainly it would have been in Abraham's mind after that destruction, what happened to my nephew Lot? And but again, God doesn't give us these kinds of details. They're unimportant to God. We wonder about them, and I'm sure that Abraham would have searched and at some point, well, again, this is speculation, but in all probability, he would have found his nephew, or his servants would have found Lot dwelling in a mountain, or perhaps Lot looked out from the cave and saw some of his uncle's servants searching the area that had been destroyed, and would have waved to them and called to them. But again, that's speculation. However, I think it's probably reasonable speculation to think that Abraham would have done his best to find his nephew, and then once assured that he had lived, and that God had heard his request and had really answered his prayer concerning his nephew, then Abraham would have taken journey. And again, we don't know why. We don't know why. Certainly, that was a major area of that part of the world that had been destroyed. And for whatever reason, Abraham just began the journey. Now, we should not think that chapter 20 is continuing the same spiritual picture as the time after Judgment Day. As the once the fire and brimstone fell, we pointed out that God was teaching us regarding events that take place after May 21, 2011, concerning Lot and the two daughters and their plan to have children by their father. But, you know, the history of the Old Testament, the history of the saints of God, has to continue at some point. You know, we can't say that, all right, now Judgment Day came because the fire and brimstone fell, and now everything we read in Genesis and Exodus, and no, God picks up and begins new spiritual pictures, or he uses more actual historical situations to teach historical parables that will instruct us in spiritual truth. And that's what's happening in Genesis 20. And so Abraham journeyed from thence toward the south country, and dwelled between Kadesh and Shur, and sojourned in Gerar. And he is picking up stakes. His tent was mobile. He had many servants to do the work. They would pack everything on mules and horses and carriages, whatever they had, and begin to move once again. What a life! What a life for an old man. Abraham's 99 years old, about to turn 100 years old. Sarah, at this point, is probably expecting a child, because remember, God had also said in that chapter of Genesis 18 that in the set time of the next year she would have a son, the promised son. And now, time has passed. Events have expired, such as the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom, we know, was destroyed in the year 2068 BC, and Isaac will be born in 2067 BC, and so this journey Abraham is undertaking is somewhere in that time range. We don't know exactly what month or the exact date, but we know it's within 2068, 2067 BC, and Sarah, an old woman of 89, about to be 90 years old, is expecting. She will give birth to a child, and it may be early on, it may only be a month or two that she's been pregnant, and now would be the time to journey rather than later, when she begins to show, and that would be too dangerous. But perhaps it's only very early in the pregnancy, and so they're beginning to move and to journey once again. And this is the life of Abraham since he entered into the land of Canaan. Remember, he was 75 years old when he came out of the land of the Chaldees and entered into the land of Canaan as God commanded him to do so, and he faithfully obeyed. And ever since, he's been sojourning. He's been just going from one place to another. Right from the beginning, it said in, let's see, in Genesis 12, verse 1, Now Jehovah had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee, and I will make of thee a great nation. And I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So Abram departed, as Jehovah had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran. And they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, and into the land of Canaan they came. And Abram passed through the land unto the place of Sichem, unto the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanite was then in the land. So Abram, at that point, he's Abram. He had not received his new name of Abraham as yet, is taking journey out of his homeland, and he's going into the land of Canaan at age 75. Well, remember what God says about all this traveling that Abraham did in the New Testament, in the book of Hebrews. The Lord says, beginning in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8, By faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out, not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. And then it says a little further down in verse 13, These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had opportunity to have returned. But now they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. And here God is telling us about the life of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and their lifetime span quite a long period of history, and he is telling us that they all dwelled in tents. They lived in tabernacles. And we wonder, well, why? Why? They were rich men. God blessed them. Abraham was rich. In Genesis 20, he didn't have to take up his stakes and move along. He could have purchased a nice sized piece of land, and he could have set down roots and stayed there and built quite a farm or a ranch, and like many other rich men did of his time. But no, because God never told him to do so, and he followed the direction of God, the leading of God, right from the beginning when he came out of his birth land, Haran, and he entered into the land of Canaan, and it was the Lord's plan that he never settle down, that he never have an established residence and build something in this world. Rather than that, it was God's plan that he go here for a little bit, the land of Mamre, and then go to Gerar, which was in the land of the Philistines, and then move over here. And it was God's plan for Isaac to do the same thing, to move about, and for Jacob to follow suit, and likewise to establish a tent for a little while and live there for a little while, and their animals would graze upon the land, and yet would come the time when they would move once again. And God had Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob do that because they are a historical picture of all of God's elect people that live in this world for a time. We live here only for a little while, and our citizenship, our true home is not here. Once God saves us, once he takes us out of the world, out of the kingdom of darkness, and translates us into the kingdom of his dear Son, into the kingdom of light, then we no longer are a citizen. We no longer have a home in this world. We're not of the world any longer, but we become a stranger and a pilgrim. And our whole life, our whole time left in this world after the point of salvation is one in which we are sojourning. We're only sojourning. We're passing through. We're not going to make this our home. Actually, even the unsaved people of the world, they try to make this world their home. They try to put stakes in the ground, and they try to have their roots go deep and be firm and of course unmovable. But in every case, with every unsaved individual throughout all history, their life is only temporal, and whatever they build ends up being destroyed or falling down, or eventually it sees rust and corruption. There is nothing lasting nor enduring with the things that man occupies himself in this world. And they don't understand the child of God who does not love the world, because God has given us a heart to love him rather than the things of the world. And they, of course, deeply love this world, and all that they wish for is in this world. And yet the world itself will soon, one day, be taken away from them. And so they really are giving an appearance, it's a false appearance, of trying to act as though you can have an inheritance in this world and this life, that you can settle down, you can live happily ever after. If there has ever been a bigger lie than that fanciful phrase, living happily ever after in this world? It comes right out of the deceitful heart of man, and no one's yet done it, because they've all died. How do you live happily ever after when you've died and your life has come to an end? There is no ever after. You have a short, little, brief temporal season of physical existence in which you had all kinds of trouble, because man that is born of a woman is full of trouble, we read in the book of Job. You had heartache, and your body ended up seeing physical corruption, so you got some kind of disease. Maybe you lost your eyesight, you lost your hearing, you lost your hair, you lost your youth, and finally you die. Where is the happily ever after? And it's not just the poor people it happens to, it's the rich people and all the people in between. There are no winners, there are none triumphant of the natural world, of the unsaved people of the earth. They are all going to lose in the end. It also says in Job, the triumphing of the wicked is short. It appears just for a time that they win, that they have everything a person could want. They have a beautiful home and a beautiful family and money in the bank and beautiful cars and maybe even a beautiful yacht, and on and on and on. Well, check back with them. And just wait a few decades in some cases, maybe less in some others, or a little more in some others. But check back after a while, and you're going to find that that happy home is happy no more. Tragedy has come. Death has come to the house. Misery has come. And, the world doesn't handle that too well. They try to just brush it aside as quickly as possible, and to move on and get back to the smiling and the self-deception that everything is wonderful and beautiful and we're going to live happily ever after. And, well, we weren't able to do it, but now our children will. Well, no, the children will not be able to live happily ever after in this world either. It's impossible. It's an impossibility. This life is full of tears and misery and all kinds of sorrows of one sort or another for the sinner and the rebel against God. And God knows this full well, and he tells his people this, and he warns us about being attached to the things of this life. Love not the world, nor the things of the world. Why? For the world passeth away. And if you attach to it, if you love it so dearly that when the things of the world pass away, your heart is crushed and broken, well, again, where there is just sorrow here. There's just sorrow. It's only exclusively in salvation, in the new heaven and new earth, in that place in which there will be no more death, no more sorrow, no more tears, that people live happily ever after. And that phrase really belongs to God's elect. Only an elect child of God will live happily ever after. Well, I don't know how I got on speaking about happily ever after. That's not something you read about in the Bible. Well, not that phrase exactly. God does speak of abundant eternal blessings forevermore. I guess that would qualify as living happily ever after. But again, we know that God is using Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as a type and a figure of his people who are passing through the world. It says in 1 Peter chapter 1, 1 Peter 1, verse 17, if ye call on the Father, who without respect of persons judgeth according to every man's work, pass the time of your sojourning here in fear. That is, if you call on the Father, if God has saved you, if you're truly born again, and He is your spiritual father now, then past the time of your sojourning, that little period of time in which we're all involved with right now, every one of God's elect are presently sojourning in the world for a little season. It's a short temporal period of time. Remember how God speaks of life in this world in 2 Corinthians. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, it says in verse 16, "For which cause we faint not, but though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day, for our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory, while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal." Temporal means of time for a little while. When something is temporal, it means there's a time limit attached to it. Of course, people in the world, because their only way of their only real way of comparing of comparison is to compare themselves amongst themselves, and God warns against that. He says that's not wise. So they compare themselves at being 30 or 40 or 50 with others that live to be 80, 90, or 100, and then that becomes their goal. Oh, I can't wait. I'm going to strive for, and I'm going to live to be 90. I'm going to live to be 100. And because it's like one little tiny finite creature of time comparing itself to another little tiny finite creature of time, they think this space of 30, 40, 50, 60 years is enormous, and it's not. It's not, because it is just one little speck. The whole time of Earth's history, which is over 13,000 years, would not qualify as a little speck, in comparison to the eternal future to come. And so what is this little 50, 60, 70 years that the people want to live to be an old age in comparison to others? It is absolutely nothing. It's nothing. It is a temporal little short season, a moment in time. Well, Lord willing, when we get together in our next Bible study, we're going to once again look at Genesis chapter 20.